Pearls versus turds. So this is where we take some advice that someone has heard somewhere, somehow, and they've sent it into the show, and we decide whether it's a pearl or a turd, something you should follow or something you should run away from. So far, we have 9 pearls, 39 turds, 21 ties. So really, you should be running away from 60 things that we've heard on the show so far in this segment and only embracing 9 of them.
Yeah. I mean, the lesson of this exercise, more than anything else over the years, has been most of the stuff you hear out there is bullshit. Most of the advice out there is bad.
Yeah.
So keep sending them into the show, help@thinkinglsat.com. If you hear a tip that strikes you kind of funny, or you hear a tip that you think is a pearl, just send it into, again, help@thinkinglsat.com, and we'll get it on this segment of the show.
Well, I was just thinking as we were talking about this, the advice that I've given for the LSAT has perpetually gotten more and more concise over the 12 years, right? And basically it's realizing that at its core, there's only a few things you need to know. You need to know them really well. But when people start trying to get all nuanced and, expand their advice way beyond the basics, it's where you run into trouble.
Yeah. I mean, an issue like sufficient versus necessary, for some students, we're going to have to do a few dozen laps on that. I mean, there's some students where it doesn't click immediately.
Yeah.
But eventually, the difference between sufficient and necessary is obvious. It's just basic common sense that even like a 10-year-old probably understands it, like the core of it. And so, yeah, we might spend some time with you making sure that it's obvious for you, and you might have to ask follow-up questions, and it might take a minute. But ultimately, the LSAT is very simple. Even that issue, which is, the bane of most beginning LSAT students' existence, it's really just common sense. Everything we say boils down kind of to common sense.
Yeah.
So most of these tips and tricks turn out to be turds.
The thing about your example there too is that even though it may take someone a long time to figure that out, we're still talking about one concept. We're not talking about all these different, and by the way, there's this other thing and this other thing. And remember, when it's this kind of question, you got to ask this kind of thing. And it's just like too many details.
Yeah. There's just not that much. I mean, I had in my office hours the other day, I had refugees from Kaplan and Princeton and Blueprint, and they had all these crazy strategies and all these crazy mixed up ideas. And it was like, yeah, you can go ahead and just forget basically all of that, because over at the LSAT Demon, we do the LSAT the easy way, not the hard, complicated, gimmicky, convoluted way where you have to memorize a bunch of trademarks and that type of shit. It all makes perfect sense at root.
Yeah.
We firmly believe that. I mean, that's a driving strategy for us, and we will continue to evolve in that direction. Our lessons and stuff are going to get simpler and simpler. Like, we might have more and more content, but we're going to have less and less that we feel is just a critical path type of a thing. It's going to be real basic. Since I'm on this topic, Ben,
yeah,
one challenge for the listeners, especially if they're like novice LSAT students, can you give me an example of the sufficient for necessary flaw? Now that is a semantic thing that you have to know what the definition of the sufficient necessary flaw is.
Yeah.
But I'm going to do one right now. You should be able to do it. You should be able to do it with just at the drop of a hat with whatever is in your environment. You should be able to come up with an example of the sufficient for necessary flaw. And that's how I know you really understand the difference between sufficient for necessary. Okay. And like ultimately it takes like 5 seconds. Okay. So I'm looking at a piece of artwork here at my buddy's house, which features a single engine airplane. Okay. I'm going to propose an if-then statement around that single engine airplane, which is if that airplane crashes into the face of Half Dome when you're trying to fly over Yosemite, you're dead. Okay? If
Okay.
the single engine airplane crashes into Half Dome, you're dead. Billy's dead. Therefore, Billy must have crashed a single engine airplane into Half Dome. I think a 10-year-old, a smart 10-year-old would go, wait a minute, there's lots of other ways that Billy could have died. That's because the difference between sufficient and necessary is common sense.
Mm-hmm.
That single engine airplane crash will kill you, but there's infinite other things that will kill you. So even if that would kill you, just because you're dead doesn't mean that that was the thing that killed you. It's
Yeah.
obvious, it's common sense. But
Just
this is
to
a
put that in LSAT language, that crash was sufficient to kill you,
right.
but it wasn't necessary. You don't need it.
Right. I hope I go some other, although that wouldn't be that bad of a way to go, really, all else equal. You know, if I was already 95,
Sure.
that would be kind of a good way to go out. But I don't want to go out that way at 45.
Yeah.
So, but the point is, students need to be able to come up with an example of that on their own.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's how I'm going to be able to tell that you really understand the difference between sufficient and necessary. It's something that we do with all of our students. But it boils down to something where that little check off, somebody could give me an example of that, and I would know in 5 seconds that they understand the concept.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're good, and then we're on to the next. Because the LSAT
Yeah.
really does boil down to just really rudimentary, basic logic. There's no fancy logic on the really. It's all these little baby steps
Mm-hmm.
like that one.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe why there's so much bad advice out there, is that people aren't willing. Maybe it's hard to sell the idea that the LSAT's easy. It's like easier to sell the idea that the LSAT's hard and you're the only one that has the arcane knowledge to explain it.
I bet it stems from the fact that also the biggest challenge that people have with the LSAT stems from their inability to read and understand sentences. And it's like, that's not an easy thing to teach. I mean, actually, I don't think it's that hard. You start teaching it, you figure out ways. You're like, okay, let's deal with this one sentence at a time. But it's not like so easy where you're just like,
Yeah.
oh, remember
Yeah.
that the means
I do
cat or
think it's a
something.
thing that they don't want to sell, though. You know, like I that's, you get a little bit of tough love in my classes or with our classes. I think we give people, we're very direct, and we're going to give it to you straight. The problem you're having 90% of the time, literally 90% of the time, maybe more, is that you're just not reading it carefully enough. Like you just didn't understand. You either didn't understand what the passage said, or you didn't understand what the question was asking, or you didn't understand what the answer choices said, both the right one you didn't pick and the wrong one you did pick. You didn't read that shit carefully enough. That's why you missed the question. And we'll read it to you slowly and carefully and make sure you understand every bit. And then once you understand all of those individual things, you're like, oh, well, so it's B. And we're like, yeah, I know. Makes perfect sense. You just had to like read it carefully. So
Yeah.
that's like the opposite of what Kaplan does, though. Kaplan is like, oh, you're scoring 132. Oh, well, we know your problem. Your problem is you didn't read the question stem first on the logical reasoning, and you didn't pick and choose which game to do, and you didn't pick and choose which question types to do, and you didn't use all this gimmicky skipping around bullshit. And then the students, they like to hear that, I think, because they want, nobody wants to know that it's just them,
Yeah.
that they just didn't read it right.
Yeah.
But that's the truth.
Well,
Almost always that's the truth. You just needed to read it more carefully.
yeah. Well, yeah, I was just thinking too. I still remember when that teacher, there's this teacher named John who used to work for me. I had to let him go because he was always late. But
Oh no.
he was really good. He was really good at the LSAT. And one thing he said, he came from Kaplan. He's like, yeah, in my training manual at Kaplan, I'm willing to say this on the podcast because he just couldn't get over it. But it said that if the teacher did not understand why an answer choice was wrong, to just tell the class that it was out of scope. I was like, that's an
Out of scope.
interesting,
Yeah.
just like this vague like concept, like, oh, that's out of scope. But it's so, what's so weird about it is it's like this weird thing in politics too, where people get up and say things and everybody just kind of nods and you're like, that's not rational. It's like you can just say it to a class. You could say, we could do it in our classes. We'd be like, oh yeah, oh look, man, that's out of scope. And people would nod. They'd be like, oh yeah, okay. It's like nothing happened there.
Out of scope is something that I never ever say. People come
Yeah.
to us saying out of scope, and I'm like, out of scope? What do you mean? What do you mean out of scope?
Because
What are you
even,
talking about?
like if we use a more precise phrasing, right? If we say that's not relevant or irrelevant, in a lot of cases, I actually have to push back against that. I'm like, are you saying that answer choice is completely irrelevant? No, it's not irrelevant. It's just that it doesn't matter in this particular situation because of this, but it is a relevant thing. It's talking about cats and then passages about cats, So anyways, you just have to dig in and understand what's actually being said again.
Yeah. All right. So we ready for this pearl or turd? Probably turd.
The person writes, I have a pearl versus turd question. It's actually an ancient Chinese cramming skill reserved as a last resort.
If the ancient Chinese had to cram?
For what?
Okay.
If 4 answer choices are short and 1 answer choice is long, oh my God, this is not.
I glanced at this and I was like, instant turd. There's no possible way that this is that this is correct. I'll just go ahead and update the scoreboard right now. This is turd number 4.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a turd.
But anyway.
So the advice continues, choose the long one. If 4 answer choices are long and 1 answer choice is short, choose the short one. If the answer choices are about the same length, choose the statistically most likely one. Wait a sec.
The fuck
That's
does
all
that
of them.
even mean?
Yeah.
I guess that probably means the C is the answer 21% of the time on the last 5 questions on the reading comp or whatever that bullshit is. The statistically most likely one. No, they each have a 1 out of 5 chance of being correct. Yep. And no, I have never seen a question ever where I thought, oh, well, if there's 4 answers that are short and one of them that's long, so I'll choose the long one. Or there's 4 that are long and 1 that's short, so I'll choose the short one.
I actually think that the answers tend to be similarly length on the LSAT, but now I've never even thought about it, really. I specifically remember that you railed against similar strategies, citing the concern that it distracts you from understanding the answer choices themselves. Yes. Therefore, I consider this a Hail Mary move. I wouldn't even consider it a move.
No, this has
get it out of your mind.
This has 0 value. This isn't going to help you. I mean, if you got a question right using this move, it's because you had a 1 out of 5 chance of getting it right, and you got it right. That 1 out of 5 chances. Yeah, this is not. This is a complete turd. I wish I could give this one 2 turds. I mean, this is like, no, absolutely not.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this listener continues. In addition, I would like to argue that the reasoning behind this strategy is that certain questions demand a long-winded answer and certain ones a terse response.
No. No, they don't. And any lawyer can turn something terse into something long-winded without changing the meaning.
Exactly.
Any good editor can change something long-winded into something terse without changing the meaning. There's no such thing as a question that requires a terse or long-winded answer.
Yeah.
No.
That is how I felt when one of my homework assignments was to come up with my own multiple choice questions on the course material. Okay, that's great. What you thought is you were writing your own test for the first time in your life, as opposed to someone who's done it their entire career, like the
That's a
people they hire at the LSAT.
boy. Could you imagine having our students do that? That I mean, it's like I could see that, I guess, being kind of fun, but the result of that would be complete garbage for anybody scoring 170 or less would not be capable of writing valid logical reasoning questions.
Yeah.
What do you, that just seems like but I would love to know what program that is where they're having you write your own multiple choice questions on the course material. That sounds like busy work. Did you already cover all 9,000 of the existing LSAT questions?
I didn't know if this person was referring to LSAT homework in particular or just like
Well, even worse would be
homework
multiple
in
choice
general.
questions on the theory, the theoretical lecture that you had about the work, about the LSAT. I mean, that would be even worse.
Maybe even worse.
Write a multiple choice question about LSAT question types or something like that. What a waste of time.
So I wonder, this person continues. So I wonder if that would help you make your final judgment. No, we already made our final judgment, but thanks. Let this go.
Hey, you you should be easily eliminating 3 answers to every question already. I mean, the truth is that 4 wrong answers are completely wrong and 1 right answer is completely right because of the content. It has nothing to do with the length of the answer choices. I mean, this sounds like a complete guess. This is a Hail Mary when you're already down by 40 with 2 seconds to play. I mean, this is just like, this is not a Hail Mary. This is a punt. You've lost at this point. I mean, this is just not, there's no value in this tip.
Yeah, this is weird. This is where you can't even eliminate one answer. I don't,
Right.
I
Like
still am
what?
going back to to your point about the ancient. How's this ancient? Did they have
The
multiple choice
ancient
back then?
Chinese cramming skill. When the ancient Chinese were studying for their exams, their multiple choice exams, but they knew the
Maybe,
statistical likelihood of each answer choice. What?
is is drawing sticks like an ancient Chinese thing? Maybe they're like, choose the shorter stick. Yeah, that's
Oh, the
the
shorter
point of
straw.
yeah.
Yeah.
That was the point of the exercise, actually.
Although usually when
Um,
you're drawing straws, you want the one that's the same.
that's true.
You don't usually want the different one when you're drawing straws. Usually bad things happen to the person who draws the one short
Yeah.
straw.
Yeah, this is true. Okay, well, if you want to get the short straw, follow this advice.
Thanks, whoever
Um,
this was, for sending this in. That was a
yes,
kick.
two that gave us 2 turds actually, but it was also twice as funny. So that's